we're going to start this video off with the main supplies. As you can see, these are 8-foot long 2x4s, and I used 3 of them for the desk build. On the right there, you'll see the 2-inch square tubing, and I used about, you could say, 4 feet of that. In this scene, I'm just demonstrating where I'm going to make the cuts. As you can see, I'm starting at the end of the boards and measuring halfway down, which is about 4 feet in. Once I measure 4 feet in, that's where I'm making the cut. So I'm going to take my speed square. After I make my marking, make a deep mark in there, so that way when I go to the miter saw, I can just cut straight down the middle on all 3 boards. Now I'm going to take my speed square and go ahead and make my mark from that center point. All right, remember, safety is always first, so I'm protecting my ears and also my eyes in this clip. Gloves are optional. If you need to wear gloves to prevent slippage or protect your hands, I recommend doing that. So here I'm just making my cuts I marked. After making 3 cuts, you end up with 6 boards in total. The client requesting the table is going to need the table to be 45 inches wide and at least 27 and a half, 28, 29 inches deep. Now, this is more length than what I need and more width than what I will need. But these boards come with a little chamfer or corner round on each end. So what I have to do next is take it to the table saw and get rid of this, so that way these boards butt up perfectly against each other. All right, so that's the next step. Now in this clip, I'm demonstrating the 3D printed push block that I used throughout the build. I'll leave the link in the description below, but this is a great block. Using this block on the table saw made my job a whole lot easier. Now I'm just demonstrating here different passes with the table saw, cutting the roundovers off the end of the boards. And here I'm demonstrating using that push block from earlier. Couple things you want to consider when using the table saw: make sure your blade is sharp. Do not cut with a dull blade. And also make sure that the motor is polished. So I had to make these cuts, 1 on each side, 6 boards, 12 cuts. Well, guys, I have to say that I really like how everything's coming along so far. So basically, if we look here, what you'll notice is that the board's made up pretty good, and I have to arrange the boards in order to make sure that they fit the best way. Then it's the process of grinding down or sanding down any edges that I need to, going ahead and securing the dowels and glue and clamp. And that'll set over probably a span of 24 hours. But for right now, it's going really great, and I'm happy with the results. Also, I'd like to say this 3D printed push block is amazing. I even dropped it one time. It didn't break or shatter or anything. Basically, you can find this on Thingiverse, and I'll leave the link in the comment section below. But this push block was very useful when I was cutting the edges off the boards, the roundovers off the boards, and this is really a useful print. And I also have a video on 3D printing as far as tools and different ways you can use 3D printing. But definitely if you're into woodworking, this is a good push block. It also has different accessories you can add on to this push block, but I chose the basic simple push block for this particular job. Alright, in this clip, I'm just organizing the boards, lining them up, making sure each side mates well together. So I'm just taking my time, flipping the boards around, making sure they lay as flat as possible. Now that we got the boards cut to size, I put them in order based on which sides lined up the best. So I've already taken them on the table saw and cut the edges off the side. So now I have to go ahead and get my dowels ready. I want to make sure that I have enough dowels. So I'm going to cut the longer length that I have. This is 4 feet length. I'm going to cut these in 3 inches, and this is 24 inches. So I'm going to cut this one into 2 inches. And so that way I have 5 seams to put together, and I'll have enough dowels for all 5 seams. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and make my lines to put my dowels. And basically I need to make sure that there's enough dowels that's offset to add strength. So I'll be doing that next. Okay, in this section I just have a 2x4 used as a stop, and it just makes it faster when cutting these dowels. So I got it set at 2 inches, and I'm just running through those, cutting those dowels. This is what they look like when they're finished. Okay, in this step, I'm just demonstrating marking your holes for each board. I've got some clamps set up, ready to use the hole jig, the center hole jig. And here's the center hole jig. I started off with a bigger one. I have 2 3D printed. The bigger one would work great, but there's a missing piece in the middle that keeps the debris out of it as you drill. So later on I switched to the smaller red one, and it worked out great. Both work great, but I switched to the smaller one for the sake of time and making it work faster. Okay, so in this clip I used a separate board to go ahead and offset those holes as I drilled them. Now in hindsight, I probably would have left that off and just drilled down the center, but having offset dowels gives you vertical strength up and downwards, whereas if they were in the center, they would just be central strength. Although later on I will demonstrate how it's kind of posed a problem to make the dowels offset, but it's a good method as long as you're not taking down too much off the board when you're planing. So here I'm just using the pocket hole jig, and as you can see, those wood chips are getting into the hole, and I'm having to drill them out because there's a piece that I didn't 3D print to keep those chips out. But it works great. Later on I switched to the smaller red one just to speed things up. And here are the holes offset, as you can see, up and down to give you vertical strength in both directions. All right, now everything's prepped and ready. All the holes are drilled. I also have them labeled based on the face. Now time for the fun part. We're going to get this thing glued up. All right, let's get to it. Now if you're curious to know how I mark each hole, you want to make sure that the match is between each side of the face. So I used letters A through E. Since there was 5 seams, I used 5 separate letters marked on each side of each board. Right now I'm just gluing them in and tapping in the dowels. First board made it up well, okay? Not much of a gap, but once I clamp it down, it should be good to go. Alright, so we're gonna keep going. In this picture, you can see the boards glued together and clamped. I let this set for about a day and a half to make sure that glue set up and the boards were tight. The tabletop is going to require some work. As you can see, there is a slight warp to it, so I got to get it on the CNC to level it out. Now, the only thing I got to decide is which side that is going to be the top and which side is going to be the bottom. Also clean up any glue and also fill any gaps that need to be filled. So I'm going to pick the best side that lays the flattest and then run a planing pass with a planing bit in order to get it nice and flat and even. This is the bit I'll be using today, which is basically a flattening or surfacing bit. This is going to make the one side of the desk flat, and then once that side is flat, I can lay it on the base and then run the other side. All right, let's get to it. So here I'm just securing the board down on the CNC. As I said before, in hindsight, I probably would have centered those dowels, which would have reduced the warping. Also would have been less strong, but the glue and the dowels combined should be plenty of strength for a tabletop. Hey, I'm going to manually demonstrate what I'm doing right now. As you can see at the base, there's a steep warp. And so what I'm doing, I'm going to be planing the entire board. The machine's going to handle the rest. But as you can see, I'm going to flatten the top surface. You see a difference already. Once that flat surface is done, then I can flip it over and plane the other side. All right. Alright, this is the CNC just making its passes, and the bit is 1 inch wide. So the wider your bit is, the shorter your time is. You're going to see some tool markings, but those were later sanded out, so you couldn't even tell that they were there. Lots of planing. There's plenty of sawdust, as you can see right here. I'm going to get a portable shop vac set up, but in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and vacuum this thing up so that way we can get it cutting. As you can see, it looked like it snowed in here because I haven't set up my dust collection system yet, but the CNC did a good job of making the tabletop nice and flat. So the next step is going ahead and cutting this thing out, getting the wood filler on it, and then finally getting it ready for stain. All right, let's do it. Now in this step, I could have easily just used a corner round jig. I actually 3D printed a corner round jig for another project build, but since I had the CNC, I just decided to use that. Also, if you look into this clip, you can tell that I lost a lot of thickness, but the boards were relatively thick and the desk in the end ended up still decently thick, so I didn't lose too much thickness when planing the board down. But in this video, as you can see, the CNC is passing and rounding those edges out and cutting the tabletop out. Now I'm using a router to add a bottom bevel to the desk. What I like to do is add a deep 45-degree bevel at the bottom of the desk and a slight 45-degree bevel at the top. This gives it a nice modern look to the desk. Now if you use your router correctly, you won't get as many jagged edges, but me, I made a couple of mistakes, so I'm using the hand file and just filing it and sanding it down. Here I'm just rotating and finishing up my bevel cuts for the bottom and making those corrections. See me flipping the file, it's because this particular file has 4 different patterns, 2 on one side, 2 on the other, for different roughnesses and smoothness to grind the wood down. Okay, here I'm just demonstrating how I'm making the adjustment for the top bevel. I'm going to bring it down so that way there's a very slight 45-degree bevel at the top, which is going to give the tabletop a nice finish. I didn't want to choose a roundover. Roundovers are good for kids so they don't hurt themselves, but the 45-degree bevel gives it a nice, elegant look. Okay, for the sanding portion, I used a stainable plastic wood filler, and I just filled those gaps or any imperfections that may have been in the wood, and also some seams just for looks. Okay, here I'm sanding the bottom, which was also filled. Now, one thing I didn't film was how to put the T-nuts on the bottom so that way the legs can mount to the wood top of the desk. But basically you just hammer those in and make sure they're flush with the bottom. Okay, once I was done with the staining, the tabletop turned out great, but if I were to do this again, I would separate the steps. I used a pre-stain and then an all-in-one stain and sealer. But if I did this build over again, I would go ahead and use a separate stain and then be able to control and choose what type of sealer that I want to use. Okay, with your pre-stain, you want to make sure that it soaks into the wood really good. and that this part helps the stain adhere to the wood. So make sure you apply liberally your wood stain. Okay, make sure it has a nice color change, and then it'll be ready for stain. Okay, and this is the stain I went with. It's a Minwax Poly Shades. It has your stain and poly all in one step. And as I said again, I would have separated these two steps. I think that works out better for me. But I guess for more experienced carpenters, they were able to use this more easily. You'll see in this clip as I add more passes, allowing that stain to dry, that it's going to get darker and darker. So initially, I was a bit concerned about the fill spots because I had to use filler from a whole nother color than the wood. But later on, you really couldn't even see it at all. Okay, and here's a clip of the first layer of stain. Now I'm applying the second layer. Applying the different coats of stain. Okay, so if you decide to build your own desk, as I've done here for a particular client, once you get to the stain part, the tabletop is pretty much done. And then you just choose a polyurethane or clear coat of your choice. They wanted a matte looking finish. So in the video, in this clip here, it's gonna look a little bit glossy towards the end, but actually when it dries, it's very matte. I'm not gonna show that in this video, only because I'm saving the finished result in the final reveal video coming out next week. Okay, so now I'm getting into starting the third coat, and you want to remember to mix that can well because a lot of the pigment can settle to the bottom. But this is pretty much going to wrap up the end of this video because this is the tabletop. In video 2, you're going to see how I assembled the legs from the 2-inch steel tubing. Okay, so here I'm applying the last coat, and like I said, the more coats you put on, the darker it gets. Right now it's looking pretty glossy. There's 6 hours of dry time in between each coat, so just remember that you want your coats to fully dry. If you need to sand them down in between each coat, and then apply a new coat. All right, and here's a picture of close to the final result of the tabletop. And like I said, the final reveal won't be into the reveal video coming out a week after the legs video. All right, so this is gonna wrap up this video, and we'll get into the details toward the end.